Günaydın. Adım Dawid Bartelt, Heinrich Böll Vakfı'nın müdürüyüm. And this is all I'm going to say in Turkish. Right now, I think we have met, all of us, we have met already. So we can just start. And Cem Bijo asked me to start by reminding you that if you haven't done so, please register outside on this list. This is a important bureaucratic act for us, and also, of course, help yourself to all these publications free of charge you will find out there, right? Okay, let me give you some introductory remarks from our institutional point of view. I think it's not our institutional point of view, but generally that talking about China is imperative. You can even say mandatory these days, rightly so, I would say. I mean, it's hardly to overestimate China's political and economic relevance for the future of the globe. I really would say that. The same goes for climate change as a challenge for humanity and China's role in it. The country is already the world's biggest emitter of CO2, having surpassed the United States already 15 years ago. It is responsible for more than a fourth part of all CO2 emissions worldwide. And also, China is expected to become the world's largest economy, GDP-wise, by the end of this decade. Thirdly, both in terms of a producer as in terms of a consumer market, China plays a very important role when it comes to renewable energies, namely solar and wind energy, and is successfully selling renewable energy technology all over the world. The German government is the most recent state representative in the EU, and only 1 out of 4, and we have 26 member states, to have published a formal China policy paper or strategy, following the Netherlands, Sweden, and Finland. The German paper defines China as a, and I quote, partner, competitor, and systemic rival. It sounds like a contradiction, and it is a contradiction, in fact, but it expresses the need to engage with that future or even current superpower while not giving up one's values and aspirations. Interestingly, relations between Germany and the EU on the one hand and Turkey on the other hand also can be described in deeply ambivalent terms. As a study published by us in the beginning of this year and written by Ceren Ergenç, who is here with us, our co-organizer and also panelist, and also Sirma Altun and Derya Göçer, as this study sums up, and I quote, although China and the EU share a common environmental goal of expanding the renewable sectors, the competition aspect of the collaboration-competition nexus in this field has gained prominence, especially from the 2010s onwards, and in third countries in the Eastern Mediterranean, such as Turkey. So Turkey is important, both to China and to the EU, and energy politics are a priority issue here. As Heinrich Böll Foundation, we are trying to observe and contribute to the question how and where the EU will be positioning itself within this systemic competition between China and the US and the EU. Talking about China and Turkey relations, we will be focusing today on climate change and renewables for 3 reasons, at least 3 reasons. First, as a small foundation, we want to generate genuine content which is both considered relevant and consistent with our values. Every day, thousands of words are published on China and Turkey alone. We cannot compete with general political analysis, neither want we to. We think politics, even geopolitics, need a more differentiated analysis that goes beyond an Ankara versus Beijing versus Brussels perspective. We need a multi-actor perspective that includes civil society, and we look at specific issues. Environmental and climate politics seem to be a relevant, future-driven, and by now under-discussed angle for discussion. Second, Turkey itself has still a long way to go for a more climate-friendly economy and energy production. The latter, the energy production especially, is still very much coal-based, fossil fuel-based. Talking about renewables, when looking at the relations with the biggest or second biggest player in the world, China, is looking at the future in the right way. And lastly, EU-Turkey relations are also a major concern for our foundation. We believe that cooperation in environmental affairs and climate protection, when modernizing the Customs Union Agreement, but also and especially within the European Green Deal, is a good way, not only to help Turkey and the EU to contribute to their climate protection obligations under the Paris Agreement, but also to loosen and strengthen the relationship between the EU and Turkey, which is, as you know, pretty much frozen for quite some time, and this is harmful for both Turkey and the EU. There are opportunities. There are also perceived threats. I'm sure we're going to talk about the carbon border adjust mechanism. But it is worth a sincere and thorough look at it. And this is why I'm sincerely looking forward to this discussion. And I'm hoping for insights and inspirations for your as well as for our future work. Let me end by thanking first and foremost our panelists who have so readily accepted our invitation. Ceren, Levent, Dursun, and moderator Veysel, they will be presented later on. And of course, our organizers, Ceren, together, sitting in the back, all of you know. So thank you all of you very much. Good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, David. As David underlined, China is a major player in green technologies, most importantly in solar panels, solar equipment, and wind power equipment. And at the same time, EU, European institutions, financial institutions such as European Investment Bank, European Bank for Development and Reconstruction are important financiers in green transition in Turkey and in broader Europe, we could say. So when discussing green energy transition in Turkey, apparently these two, the EU and China are two important players, global actors. So we are gonna listen to talks on this topic. And before moving to talks, let me introduce our speakers. Let me start from my left, my imminent left. Ceren Ergenç is a researcher at Autonomous University of Barcelona. She holds a PhD from Boston University, and previously she was an assistant professor at Middle East Technical University. Her work focuses on policymaking processes in China and China's global engagement. Then we have Levent Özcan Caner. He is a member of TÜSİAD and the Deputy General Manager of Borusan EnBW Energy Company. He is particularly responsible for electric vehicle charging business, and he holds industrial engineering degree from METÜ, as well as an MBA degree from KAS Business School at University of London. And finally, we have Dursun. He is a project coordinator at Istanbul Policy Center, affiliated with Sabancı University. He has coordinated several projects at IPC, and he holds a master's degree from Middle East Technical University in Earth System Engineering. I think we can move to listen Ceren's speech first, then followed by, I guess, the Dursun's speech, and then Mr. Caner's speech will be our final talk. Ceren, floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Veysel, our moderator, Dr. Veysel Tekdal, who's an assistant professor of China's political economy, one of the very few people in Turkey actually who does political economy of China. So I'm happy to be with him and our valuable panelists here. So I'm going to start this panel by introducing the report. I wrote with my colleagues, Sırma Altun from Ankara University, again, another China person in Turkey who works on political economy of China, and Derya Göçer from Middle East Technical University. And David already introduced our paper a little bit, but I want to go into detail of this report a little bit as an introduction to the panel. And that report was published earlier this year, and there has been some developments since then. And I'm looking forward to hear from our panelists and their expertise and insights from the sector as well. Through that. So what am I going to do is first to start with a brief overview of China's involvement in not only in Turkey's renewable energy sector, but overall its global quest about renewable energies. And it's a gradual, steady, but a gradual takeover of, if I may, the renewable energy sectors globally and in the greater European area in particular. And then I'm going to put Turkey within this context. And I'm planning to end my words with a couple of words about prospects for future, which I believe will connect my presentation to the next two, whom can be in a better position to talk about these emerging fields in the green energy sector. So what we see globally and in the greater European area is the convergence of two trends, one in China and one in Europe. And the audience here might be more familiar with the European one, the European Green Deal, and decarbonization, and how these normative, if I may, procedures transform a European industrial sector within Europe and outside through overseas investments. And concurrently, what we see is China's quest for industrial upgrading in two main areas, digitalization and sustainability. The twin revolutions, twin industrial revolutions of digital and green revolutions. And it is marked with Made in China 2025, which is coming to an end soon, but China's plans to dominate the already existing and the emerging fields in digital and green technologies will continue after 2025 as well. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of my presentation, how this deadline, the so-called deadline, has already been extended. And in our reports, we focus on three aspects of this EU-China competition and collaboration in some fields, renewable energies, green finance, and decarbonization. And to say the last thing at the beginning, what we identify is a almost tense competition between the EU and China on the renewable energy markets. But a collaboration or at least synchronization when it comes to decarbonization, which is again, of course, related to both renewable and traditional industries. But our main takeaway is that the EU-China relationship in the what we call the green revolution is cannot be defined either only with competition or collaboration, but it is actually a back and forth between these two and inherently interrelated. And we can see the impact of this competition collaboration nexus in the third countries, especially in the EU neighborhoods, and Turkey is a case in point for that. In our reports, we basically looked at solar and winds and onshore winds technologies and investments in Turkey. And if you look at the green table there, you'll see the fast pace of solar and wind investments in Turkey. So these are, so far, are the two main renewable energy fields that Turkey has been developing. And we identify a competition pattern between China and European companies. And of course, the Turkish business actors and state actors, especially at the central level, do take positions in this competition between the EU and China. As I say at the end of the presentation, combined with the next two presentations and the Q&A, I would like to, I really hope to hear more from you, from your expertise, experience, and insights about the emerging technologies like offshore winds, green hydrogen, and nuclear, if it counts as a green energy at the end of the day, which is quite debatable, but here we are talking about nuclear. So just a brief background about China's energy investments in Turkey. There was a very intense energy diplomacy around 2015, which led to a sudden increase in Chinese investments in Turkey's energy sector, but most of them well, actually, more than 50% of Chinese investments are in the energy fields in Turkey. But about 75% of it, 3/3 of it, is actually in traditional energies like coal. So there's that. But no matter how small the share of the renewable energies, China has been trying to get a share in Turkey's growing renewable energy markets as well. And here we identify two phases. In the first, and these two phases coincide with the development of renewable energy, solar and wind energy in Turkey as well. So it's not independent of that. So in the first phase, the Turkish state started off with large launching state bids for large concentrated solar and wind parks, plants. And these state bids were conducive to the formation of large consortiums that necessarily included both Turkish partners and international partners as well. And in this phase, there were consortiums that included mostly German companies from Europe, a couple of Asian, non-Chinese Asian, namely South Korean bidders, who actually ended up winning one of the bids and then giving up on it. That's an interesting story. Maybe we can get back to that during the Q&A. And the Chinese were among the competitors in these consortiums too, but they lost these bids to their European competitors with no exception. And that according to our informants during our interviews from the Chinese side, was perceived as an almost intentional blockage of the Chinese in the solar and wind scene in Turkey, and this perception led to an eventual withdrawal of the large Chinese companies. Some of them being SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and some of them are private. And when we come to the phase 2 of Turkey's solar and wind development, when the Turkish state itself also kind of gives up on these large solar wind plants and goes for smaller consortiums that are gonna build smaller and perhaps financially more doable, more manageable solar and wind plants. And at that stage, the large Chinese companies have already decided that they are not, they don't want to be players in this game, so they don't even enter the bids anymore in this second stage. They changed their policy of involving in Turkey's renewable market by directly doing businesses with small and medium-sized enterprises, by selling them the technology and equipment for really small boutique-sized solar and wind plants, the private ones, right? So this is maybe this table is too big and contains too much information right now, but this is even a better motivation for you to go back and read our report, perhaps at your own pace, right? So this is a summary of how the state bids for solar and wind plants were both won by German consortiums. I mean, consortiums that include German companies, that is. And in the second one, in the second half of the right half of the table, you can see how the nature of these bids change, and they are given to smaller companies, larger in size, instead of like one big, large consortium to build a huge plant, right? So this is phase 1, and in the phase 2, what happens when the Chinese stop bidding in these state bids for large plants and focuses on the retail sale, if I may say, to SMEs, we see the chronic problem of trade deficits coming into the picture, that the Chinese push both domestic Turkish and other international, especially European producers out of the markets. And then we see the states well, as a result of lobbying by both domestic and European companies, imposing anti-dumping measures on specific Chinese producers in the solar and wind technology, which is, again, a constant complaint from the Chinese side, both in our interviews and also in their formal diplomatic conversations with the Turkish state. So this is where we left this solar and wind scene. And I'm gonna briefly talk about decarbonization and how do we see the EU-China-Turkey triangle for decarbonization. And here I'm gonna slightly change my framework. When I was talking about the renewable sector, I was talking mainly about EU-China competition over Turkish markets, right? Here, I'm gonna switch to a framework that sees Turkey and China in competition for European markets in the face of the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is basically the internationalization of Europe's own emission trading system, ETS, right? SBAM, which is now in the trial stage as scheduled, started as scheduled, will be a challenge to non-European, non-EU producers in the European market. Right? This has been known from the very beginning. But what we see here is two distinct, different attitudes from China and Turkey towards the upcoming SBAM difficulties for them. So what China did was to introduce its own domestic ETS system. And for those of you who are familiar with the Chinese system, you will know that China first does policy experimentation at the local level, city and provincial level, and then picks the successful best practices to be central policies. So there are a lot of successful local, like city and provincial level ETS systems in China, which are basically based on carbon taxes, but mostly carbon credits for the local industries as a motivation to transform their industrial production in a carbon-friendly way. And these best practices are now formalized into a centralized ETS system that actually eliminates the disadvantages of the EU's SBAM for the Chinese producers at the end of the day. And on top of that, Chinese central state, national state, also issued a green guidelines for overseas investment for its own local companies, both SOEs, state-owned enterprises, and the private companies, to start adjusting their production processes for particularly European standards. So what I'm trying to say here is, shortly, China has been preparing for SBAM for a considerable period of time. And in the end, it is estimated that it won't be as disadvantaged as it was first predicted when SBAM was first formulated. In comparison, in Turkey, we have some subsidies issued by the Minister of Environment, not energy, but environment, for the solar and wind companies, renewable energy companies, to remain compatible in the European markets, but we were told that after the currency crisis, these subsidies were pegged to Turkish lira, which lost the value drastically vis-a-vis euro. So basically, these subsidies are not enough to remain compatible in the European markets. But there is that. So we actually see the Minister of Environment stepping in and trying to do something about SWAM, whereas for the heavy industries like steel and cement and everything, and Dursun will be in a better position to talk about that, and perhaps Levent as well. There is concerns about competitiveness in the European markets, but by the time we published this report, we have not seen any plans for either subsidizing or encouraging in different forms the SMEs in the heavy industries to stay compatible with the European markets after the trial period of SWAM starts. Here, I'm just gonna conclude with what I see as the future directions of EU-China energy competition, renewable energy, green energy competition. And one of the emerging fields is green hydrogen, and I'm saying that looking at China's own developments about green hydrogen. So China is the top hydrogen producer and consumer in the world, but it's mostly based on fossil fuels, and it is now making efforts to green its hydrogen production based on hydropower, as if now it is an ignorable percentage of the overall hydrogen production, like about 1%, literally. The central government of China has actually issued a macro plan to develop green energy and create an hydrogen industry value chain, which means that it's gonna internationalize its green hydrogen production, which will have direct consequences for both the EU and the greater European area, including Turkey. So I would love to hear more from our panelists, from our experts, and from our audience about their insights and experience about it. And the second one is nuclear, a very recent development that Minister of Energy announced that the third nuclear plant of Turkey in making might be financed by China. The negotiations are at the final stage. And that is in line with China's own nuclear build-up, and again, internationalization of its nuclear energy production as well. And it puts Turkey very close to China itself in terms of the nuclear potential. Maybe not the existing capacity, but in terms of nuclear buildup and future potential, let's say. So I think it's something worth talking about too. Before the panel, when we were talking, Levent reminded me of the prominence of the EV markets, the battery markets too. So I'm just going to leave it to him to talk about the prospects about the EV batteries too, as a third field for future developments. And with that, I'm going to conclude my verse. Thank you.
Good morning to all. Thank you for the invitation to that event. I would like to thank Ceren and Cem Bey. I would like to introduce first myself, and I will be providing some details, mostly for Turkish energy strategies. In the question part, maybe I will touch upon the steel sector, which is one of the largest consumer in Turkey in terms of energy share. I work for Istanbul Policy Center, as Veysel Bey said. We are mainly producing policy assessments in the field of climate. We have worked on the renewable side. We have worked energy production. Nowadays, thanks to with the support of several funds, one of them is ECF. We are working in the field of steel decarbonization in the Turkish steel sector. You can access these reports through IPC website. I will try to make three topics with examples as suggested by the Ceren Hanım. I will explain some details regarding impacts and plus Turkish strategies on these three different topics. Let's move on the first topic, EU and China impacts on Turkey. EU and China will be one of the main exporters, at the same time importers, particularly EU in terms of share in the wind industry and in terms of share in the certain manufacturing industries. In order to increase the market share in Turkey, EU companies will be increasing their part in Turkey, both supporting existing plants, manufacturing plants, plus EU companies, as Ceren Hanım mentioned, will increase their power production capacity in Turkey. Both countries have similar targets. Of course, China is coming from, let's say, 30 years later in terms of make a peak in the total GHG emissions. But at the end of the day, China has also target as well. This is kind of framework slide. What we know from this slide, the investments from China and Turkey, China and EU will increase in Turkey. At the same time, the trade relations with Turkey and EU and Turkey and China will increase, as these are the main new development paradigms of these countries. And in the recent years, we have already learned so much about the Belt and Road Initiative. In order to stabilize its green supply chains, EU is also working in the Africa, in the Latin America, in order to shape supply chains for the renewables. And this is very recent meeting from the Global Gateway Forum. Although it seems as a state aid to do these countries, it also has some background to access markets for this green supply chains. And this is also very, let's say, flagship approach of EU. They have assessed main dependency for certain products. Now they are building their Net Zero Industry Act and their new industry strategy to become more autonomous. And the other topic in terms of impacts in Turkey, although China has very limited impact for the standardization and regulations in Turkey in the energy field, in the EV battery section, in the EV lithium-ion battery sections, there will be new standards which are defined by China rather than EU or rather than US. We know that Turkey is a candidate country, that therefore one of the main regulation effects are coming from EU rather than China. And our energy market has been already shaping by EU privatization directives. And in the near future, we will have certain regulations, at least on the paper, for the transpose the EU Corporate Sustainability Directive, EU tariffs, EU taxes as well. And sorry. This is the last slide for the EU-China impacts on Turkey. There will be two different impacts. One of them is for the energy producers. As a big players in terms of construction power and in terms of network, Turkish companies, energy companies will increase their investments in EU. This is one of the impacts. And EU companies will either increase their current operational capacity in Turkey or will make new investments. It can be wind industry as well. But we could also expect Chinese in the new green manufacturing sectors as well. One of them is EV. Chinese companies has been already increasing their cooperation in Turkey in the automotive sector, I mean the battery sector. And the second impact is coming from indirectly. For example, steel industry players want to be more competitive to sell their products to EU or to become more competitive with the Chinese steel sector. They want to decrease their energy cost. It was 10%, but nowadays it became a 30%. I mean, the share of energy cost in the steel industry is just increased 3 times since the 2021. Therefore, there is an indirect impact. If Turkish players want to be competitive, they have to increase their renewable investments. As written there, in the next 3 years, there will be 3 gigawatt investments directly from the big energy consumers. This is not directed by government, this is directed by market to become more competitive. And what we know is that before 2020, you don't hear so much supportive arguments from the big, large consumers from industry. They say Yektem is a kind of, let's say, extra cost for us. But nowadays, they are making a pressure on the governments to increase grid renewables. I mean, if the government increase renewable shares of the grid system, they will be less exposed to carbon taxes. Therefore, they are making an indirect impact. I mean, EU make an indirect impact in terms of narrative building in Turkey from the industry players. And let's move on to the second topic. What about attitudes from Turkey to EU and China? As you know already, Ceren mentioned about that. Turkish trade is somehow EU dependent. The half of the products goes EU region and half of the products in the total imports coming from EU region. But China is number one exporter nowadays. And Russia is the second one, but mostly fossil fuel gas is coming from Russia. Therefore, it makes higher degree in terms of value. But what we know is that China has, in the last years, has increased its import share in Turkey. And it will increase with the green manufacturing investments as well. Therefore, it's not so visible, but China is number one exporter to Turkey. Turkish share to the exports from Turkey to China is not so high, but it could also be increased by the new market development. For example, middle corridor. We don't know how will be developed in the next years, but it will increase, I think, with the new policy developed by Minister of Trade. Turkey has maybe 65% trade share with the near countries, but China and the Latin America and these somehow Far East countries are not taking so much share from Turkish trade, but they have a separate faraway countries strategy. Therefore, Chinese exports to Chinese are also supposed to increase. And this is also another indicator to understand attitudes from China to Turkey or from Turkish investment environment to China. The share of China in the total amount of foreign direct investments are not so visible. But in terms of indirect investments through infrastructure, through energy infrastructure tenders, it could be counted as more as seen there. But what we know is that the EU is the number one foreign direct investor in Turkey. It seems that it will not change so much in the next years. According to invest.go.tr, these are the main large energy players in Turkey, and we have two of them from China. This means that the majority of the players who are seen important from the government are mostly European companies, some US companies, and plus South Korean companies. But there are two solar or the big renewable energy guys are also listed there, but they are not in the majority. But let's look at more in detail. In terms of solar panel trade, China has also the biggest share in Turkey. I mean, direct and indirect. Most of the manufacturing parts are coming from Turkey, coming from China to Turkey. Although we have lots of different solar panel producers, the intermediate products are coming from China. Therefore, we cannot say that Turkey is not exposing to Chinese products. And we have Kalyon Group, we have New Smart Energy. I think they will try to build their solar cell investments. Although we have more than 20 or 30 different solar panel companies, only two of them is able to produce solar cells as well. And this is a kind of problem. I mean, solar panel companies are also has an advantageous position in terms of price. But since the 2017, Turkish governmental authorities and the Turkish solar market players are trying to make a kind of advantageous position in terms of providing anti-dumping taxes. And it has been started in the 2017, and recently the decision came from the Minister of Trade, and this decision was seen right, and therefore the 16 different Chinese companies are still exposed to these anti-dumping taxes. although there is kind of extra cost for the Chinese companies, they may become also advantages in the next years while reducing their total cost as well. And regarding wind sector, the situation is somehow different. The European companies and the US companies are having more dominance in the wind industry. Of course, the small manufacturing parts or the machinery parts or the electric equipments which are coming from China is also high in terms of share in Turkey. But Turkey has a somehow solid manufacturing base in the wind industry rather than solar. Therefore, we can say that Chinese companies' dominance in Turkey is not so high in the wind sector. And I would like to provide some recent developments. As Ceren Hanım already mentioned about these YEKA tenders, Turkish companies are increasing their, let's say, operational and financial initiatives with the German companies and European companies. These are the recent signature process with the German companies and Turkish companies. There was a Turkish-German Energy Forum in the September, and it was the kind of flagship project between EU and between Germany and Turkey. They are also producing certain reports from hydrogen to capacity development for the coal power plants, etc., flexibility issues. There is a very close relation with the German governmental sites plus Turkish governmental sites in the energy planning. At least working groups are working very closely. And yes, this is also our new narrative. Hydrogen provider. Turkey has not a very big hydrogen capacity, and I don't know the share of the industry for using hydrogen. But thanks to new renewable capacities, some of the electricity produced by these renewables will go to the green hydrogen production. At least there is a narrative between Germany and Turkey. These are the selected recent developments which are showing cooperation between Turkish energy partners and the Chinese energy partners. And as I said, it could be more than maybe 10 different slides, but these are the, let's say, mostly visible ones in terms of reaching access through the news and through Google. The cooperations are somehow different. Some of them is just market sharing cooperations or distributional offices are becoming in EU. For example, yes, I can't see here, but okay, smart energy is also. Sesimi biraz yükselttim. Tamam. Turkish companies in the Central Eastern Europe is also working with the Chinese companies as well to increase their share in terms of market. And Huawei is one of the technology provider, and it is also very visible in terms of recent cooperations. And this is somehow in traditional way the EV or the automotive sector is not part of the energy sector or not used to be part of is a kind of recent development. Levent Bey will mention about that, but Chinese companies' share in the battery factories and the governmental relations are increasing so highly. As you know, TOG is Turkish electricity car investment has made the recent agreement with the Chinese company, for instance, to produce TOG batteries. This is one of the big investment in the green tech. And we have other cooperation with Zorlu and GSR Capital. This third one is not Chinese one, but the other companies, Ford, Koç, and the LG companies also working on to produce some batteries for the electrical vehicles. And yeah, Ceren Hanım has mentioned that Okay, about the third nuclear power plant will come through the Chinese, let's say, operators. It is still under negotiation, but it seems that Turkey will make a cooperation with the Chinese government. And these are the reasons the new ambassador to China was making some points regarding the cooperation Turkey and China. These are the let's say most important figures in terms of renewable energy developments in Turkey. In the future, what we will see will be mostly shaped by the government's approach to renewables in the energy production. Although Turkish renewable share in the electricity production somehow can be counted as high, but in the total energy consumption, Turkish renewables shares is not so high when you compare it to EU counterparts, or when you compare renewables share in the total final consumption in Germany or Spain. It is not, let's say, well stated. I mean, even it is so visible in terms of targets. Turkey has only 14% in the total energy consumption share. But when you look at the total target of EU renewable target in the total final consumption, it is somehow very large when you compare it to Turkey. It has to be changed, and it results in a late electrification in terms of having more green tech, in terms of having more green manufacturing in Turkey. This is my last slide about future prospects. We don't have separate strategies for industry, transport, and residential sector. We have still housing problem. We don't have a time to talk about energy efficiency of the buildings. It is somehow very luxury to talk about energy efficiency of the buildings. But we have started to talk about electrification in the transport sector. I mean, but this is also somehow very luxury. I mean that we don't talk about electrification of the public transportation or electrification of the logistics. It's somehow stresses on the personal use of cars rather than more public benefits of the transport while through having electrification in the public transportation, etc. And industry, we don't have separate renewable and energy target for industry, and we don't have established climate framework similar to Spain, similar to UK, or similar to Germany. In those countries, there is a binding target for 2030, but we don't have similar target for Turkey yet, and we don't have our comprehensive financial framework which defines incentives, direct supports for the decarbonization investments. These are the main difference. But we have to look carefully cost and benefits of new renewable investments in terms of their distributional effects in the rural areas, and in terms of sharing the costs. I mean, of course, most of the companies will try to make large profits, but we have to be careful about the public benefits of use of public money, public taxes as well. Yeah, these are my words. Thank you.
All right. Well, unfortunately, is it working? All right. Okay. Unfortunately, we run out of time, I guess, right? All right. No problems. Well, I will try to speed up my speech, but definitely I will be glad to answer any of your questions, and I will be also available in the recess if you need to hear anything else from me as well. Well, first of all, thank you very much, David, Cem, and Ceren, for inviting me, and also very valuable insights from your side as well, Ceren and Dursun. So I will try to follow the footsteps of Ceren and Dursun to have some holistic approach about what are the practicalities that we are currently experiencing in the energy market and in our investments as well. I will try to make it, let's say, more interesting with some experienced, let's say, examples as well. Just the main topic, as you have seen, is transitioning. Transitioning from a carbonized energy to a decarbonized net zero emissions energy industry in the coming years. So it's also applicable for me, by the way. Just a little bit of background from my side. I have been in the energy sector for all of my life, but I have been at the everywhere around the energy table. So I have worked in government, I have worked as a professional, and I also invested in my own facilities as well. So I have lots of different topics to talk about it, but definitely our time is quite limited. And by the way, regarding my background, I'm also transitioning from a carbon economy to a decarbonized economy. My major topic in the past has been oil and gas exploration. So I'm an oil and gas guy. I'm the bad guy in the room, but now I'm working for a full renewable company. So I'm also transitioning my background from a carbonized economy to a decarbonized economy. So it's also the same for Turkey and the international economy, and also for China as well. In Turkey, we have done a great job. Since I left the Ministry of Energy in 2011 up till now, we have increased the renewable share quite much. You have seen most of the figures in Ceren and Dursun's analysis. But just to give you an example, probably the day I left Ministry of Energy, our share of renewables in the energy sector was around 25%. So we were not at the zero level, let's say, because of our it's a bless and a curse in the energy market in Turkey. Unfortunately, we don't have natural resources like oil and gas, but we had hydropower at that same time. So most of that power, 25%, was coming from hydroelectricity power dams, especially the strategic ones like Keban, Atatürk Dam, and etc. But right now, we are talking about, let's say, more than 50% of our installed power in renewables, and just a little bit below that in total generation in Turkish economy. So just to give you some figures, the total installed power with the unlicensed generation in Turkey is around 54%. But on the other hand, we are producing around 46% of our total consumption in the energy sector from renewables. So we didn't come from zero level, but we have achieved much in the last, let's say, 10 to 20 years. So it was a very, very good story from the Turkish economy as well. And it has to stay like that as well. What I mean is, as I'm a member of TÜSİAD as well, the urbanization and the industrialization of Turkey is ongoing. So if you assume that, let's say, I'm just drawing the numbers out of my head for the vision of Turkey right now. So let's assume that if we are planning to expand by, let's say, 3% of our economy on a year-by-year basis, we have to increase the installed power of Turkey with a ratio of around 6% or 8%. This is a very bold target, and it has to be like that. So you have to keep a target that's moving from the expansion side, and also you have to increase the renewable expansion capacity inside this expanding growth in the energy economy as well. But this is the story of Turkey in the renewable perspective, and it's the same for international perspective as well, especially with the latest or the recent events in the international arena, like the COVID pandemics, like the Russian-Ukrainian crisis, right now the Israeli-Palestine conflict, and lots of things have been happening in the international area as well. And I think it's a bless and curse from a renewable perspective. The first thing, of course, with the Russian and Ukrainian crisis, if you look at Germany, for example, you have seen lots of things happening in the regulatory perspective. Well, if we have talked about let's say, an FSRU facility coming online in 2 years in Germany, I would say you're just joking, most probably just 5 years ago. But that's what we have seen in Germany right now. So it's all the same from an international perspective as well. And coming to China, as I left the Ministry of Energy as well, we were talking about Belt and Road Initiative by those times. And it was a very good notion coming from China's perspective as well. Dursun has already given some approaches from EU and US countries as well, but Belt and Road Initiative was a very big gathering from lots of countries, including Turkey. And it was one of the major perspectives. It was focused on energy infrastructure as well. But just at the beginning, I guess it's also the same notion from the perspective of these policymakers as well. China's Belt and Road Initiative focused on a holistic approach in the energy industry. So it was not just focused in renewable industry, but it has been in a holistic way of increasing China's economical share in other countries' infrastructure. So without just checking the books or internet as well, if you ask me what was the major economic undertakings of China in Turkish economy, I would say Hunutlu Power Station, which is a coal power station. It was given as an example in the presentations as well. And another major one is the development of Tuz Gölü natural gas underground storage facility, which is again a carbonized kind of development. On the other hand, there has been lots of talks about grid expansion and stuff, but the signature, let's say, projects of this Belt and Road Initiative or China's development in other countries, especially in Turkey, has been carbon-centric investments. And what we are seeing right now is there's a transitioning in that perspective as well. So Belt and Road Initiative is also transitioning into a renewable or a green way of doing things in the international businesses. But of course, there are lots of handicaps. I will just give some of these examples in the later sides of my speech. But just looking as a framework approach from a practical standpoint, when we would like to talk about an energy investment, either if it's coming from China or any parts is coming from China or EU or United States, we need to talk about especially 3 different pillars. The first one is the regulatory perspective from my mind. And Dursun has already pointed out that most of the regulation or the most of the perspectives of the regulation is coming from the European Union, not coming from China or United States. So we are trying to comply with European Union directives. Even with the CBAM or other alternatives, we have been keeping close contact with on a regulatory perspective. And if you look at the regulatory perspective on 2 main perspectives, the first one is the energy market, of course. Energy market regulation has to adapt to this transition as well. That's what the Energy Market Regulatory Authority and also the Ministry of Energy has been doing up till now. But on the other hand, we have another perspective, especially which was not that much focused on when I was in the Ministry of Energy, let's say about 15 years ago. It's the environmental regulation. So the environmental regulation has to change or alter its way to initiate or speed up the transitioning from a carbonized to a decarbonized economy. Unfortunately, most of our regulation was not built like this, but we have been seeing major developments, especially we have been anticipating the climate law in Turkey. Hopefully, we will see some signs of it by the end of this year. This will be a major game changer, most probably, for all of these things that we are talking about in Turkey. And just to give another thing over there, when we look at the environment perspective, of course, the major thing that we see now, especially as a member of TÜSİAD, is the CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. We are not quite sure about how it's going to affect our current thinking of doing things. On the other hand, even if we are unclear about it, we are trying to initiate some investments that would give us at least some leeway or some freedom to think about it to speed up things, especially the self-production or self-consumption facilities, just like solar facilities that you build up on your roof or just to match your consumption is a way of doing this. But unfortunately, we are still not clear of that if it will be compliant with the ETS or this CBAM mechanism as well. It's quite unclear. So we have to have it as soon as possible. The climate law has to be published as soon as possible for us to have a clear direction for that. And the second perspective is the technical perspective. Well, there are lots of expansion areas in the energy sector right now. Some of them we talked about it, and definitely it needs to be spoken about it for hours and hours. And most of these areas are unfortunately in the infeasibility area. What I mean is, for example, if you look at the current vision of Turkey, by the way, this is quite good. I'm not saying bad anything about it. We have hydrogen. We have small modular reactors, small nuclear power plants. We have storage-added electrical production facilities, storage-added power plants. And within these three directions, unfortunately, these are infeasible investments right now. So either the regulation has to support it or the capital expenditure, the total investment you need to have these power stations installed has to be reduced. And when we think of Chinese companies, generally this second pillar, the cost reduction, comes to our mind. But definitely it shouldn't be like that. As I have been an investor by myself in the market, I have been in touch with lots of Chinese companies. And we have seen lots of utilization increases, lots of efficiency increases in the Chinese production as well. Some of the investments that we have talked about on the battery production and also the solar production in Turkey has lots of Chinese components, by the way. So from a technical standpoint or economical standpoint, Chinese manufacturing, Chinese efficiency increases, and Chinese definitely decreased cost of investment capex would be a major key for us to go ahead in these three directions. Just another thing when I talked about hydrogen, the thing is just to tie up with my previous remarks. As I've said, if we are forecasting to have about 3% expansion in economic growth, we have to have 6 to 8% in expansion of energy. So where does the green hydrogen fit in this scenario is a big question mark, because if you need to produce green hydrogen, of course, the expansion of the electrical or energy production facilities have to be more than 8%. Otherwise, you have just one paradox on your mind. Are you going to produce or generate electricity for your own industrial or economical use, or are you trying to produce green hydrogen from this generation power facilities to export to European Union or US or elsewhere? That's a very big question mark. Of course, the regulation and the technical feasibility and the economical feasibility will be the answers in this balance. But we need to see these directions quite strongly. And another thing, just to sum up all of my remarks, the financial side of the things is quite important. Well, if you look at the balance sheet or the income statement for a general investor in Turkey, there are more than 2,000 electricity power plant investors in Turkey. And if you look at those, generally most of these are financed by either international financial institutions or export credit agencies. So in the, let's say, short to mid-term, for at least, let's say 10 years, or maybe even more, because of the tenure of the debt financing that you have, you don't have that much freedom to spend your money on, or the cash flow that you generated from. So let's say a company investing in solar energy and having 15 years of debt financing from Auler Hermes, it would not be easy for him to have a Chinese producer or Chinese investor or any Chinese component, let's say in the next 15 years, even if it's new investment deals. You don't have that much freedom to act. So that should be also another parameter in our way of thinking. So that's all I would like to say. By the way, just to give you another thing, my company, Borusan EnBW, I have been, as I've said, Borusan Holding is one of the major, let's say, industrial and trading companies in Turkey. So we have exposure in most of these areas, from steel manufacturing to, let's say, e-mobility, and also power plants or machinery equipment as well. And we have been working in lots of different geographies to support it as well. And on the other hand, our other shareholder is EnBW, which is the energy giant of Germany. So we have their approach as well, their way of thinking and their way of procedures. So we are exposed to all of these directions. In the meantime, we have been talking with, of course, Chinese developers, Chinese producers as well. And we are not, let's say, we are not looking away from Chinese manufacturing. But just to give you another perspective, again, on the regulation side, most probably it has slipped from all of our radars. Just 2 weeks ago, I guess, there was another surveillance application for a tariff code, which is what we think the EV chargers, electricity vehicle charging stations. So most probably it will result in an anti-dumping kind of approach. We don't know about it yet. But there are some signs of things evolving in the EV market as well that we have seen in the solar market. So that's all from my side. I hope it was not long. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks.
So I'd like to thank you all. You all had like 20 minutes and used that time effectively. Thank you so much, and I learned too much actually. Before opening up to the floor to questions and comments, let me underline some key takeaways from different presentations. First of all, it looks like, as Ceren underlined, EU companies are more successful than Chinese ones in winning large bids, like public supported bids. That's something I think we need to think about. And under these conditions, Chinese companies look like cooperating with Turkish companies independently, let's say, not aiming for large bids, but more preferring selling equipments or cooperating with them in different ways. And also, as Dursun underlined, the Chinese producers are important in solar cells. Yes, in Turkey we have several, 30-something solar panel producer, but they are dependent on Chinese companies for the most important input, the solar cells. That's also important, and apparently there is similar kind of dependency in producing EV batteries in Turkey. But at least we can be happy about that we still have some manufacturing capacity in Turkey. We are not at the higher end of the supply chain maybe, or technology ladder, technology hierarchy, but we still have some capacity. That's something to be happy about. But when it comes to wind power, Chinese are not that much influential in Turkish market, apparently, as far as I understand from Dursun's talk. Yeah, and I think Levent Bey is positioned. I mean, to tell many things about evolution of Turkey's energy policy with experiences from private sector as well as from the ministry. It looks like renewable energy generation has gained some momentum in Turkey over like last 15 years. But there are kind of efficiency problems, it looks like, because from what you said about CBAM, I thought we don't actually know what to do at the moment. So public policy is not quite efficient, sector is not quite knowledgeable about it. That's something to think about, I think, as well. And last thing, I think, quite important thing from Levent Bey's speech, I would say, is financing. It's all about financing, right? If you have money, you can buy technology from Chinese, Korean, from I don't know, Swedish companies. But you need to have finance. And when you get finance, usually the financier asks you to buy equipment from certain producers and not from some others. So in that sense, I think the financing side, the capital side is something important. But I would add, as a China guy, I would say China has financing too. I mean, like the export credit mechanisms that Western countries have been using for decades. China has, quite large policy banks, extending export credits or soft loans for international investments. Yeah, before, these are my key takeaways from speeches, and I also like to ask you to share your insights, your I don't know, views on Chinese stakeholders in Turkey. I mean, what do government agencies, what do Turkish stakeholders, Turkish companies think or prefer when they acting with Chinese companies or Chinese public agencies as well? So especially we would appreciate hearing from you about the China side of the debate. Now I think we can collect questions.
So my question is a geopolitical one, not about Europe, but about United States, which is seemingly, becoming more and more dominant vis-a-vis China. I mean, in all of these power politics. And there is a dimension that deals with technology at large, 5G, quantum computing, space technology, etc. But there's something about renewable technologies also. I mean, there's this decoupling going on in economy, so that we may not be able to talk about a globalization in the sense that we understood it like since the 1990s. And there's a dimension specifically with regard to technology. And my understanding is that this is also impacting electric cars right now. Batteries, for instance, are becoming almost incompatible. You may not buy a Chinese car and use, I don't know, a Tesla brand battery or something, I don't know, Western company brands. Is there anything about renewable technologies, especially, for instance, with this nuclear power plant deal with China? I mean, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, will we become, in this country, are we going to be so much dependent on China, Chinese technology, solar, wind, or nuclear, etc., so that we won't, as a NATO country and as a candidate to the EU, we won't be able to trace back to where we are? do you see such a danger or potential? Anybody can answer this. I mean, not specifically, but because Europe is a big player in the renewable energy. I mean, general environmental, this decarbonization thing. But Europe is kind of also sidestepped in more, I mean, on a general scale in these cutting edge technologies. So how decisive right now, as I understand it, Europe is pretty much able to compete against China, in Turkey at least, right? In the Turkish context up until now, but it's all becoming more affordable, cheaper, right? All these technologies. So I believe, I mean, there is a likelihood that China may dominate the market. So will there be some kind of, I don't know, that point to this in terms of being too much dependent on China, since Turkey is not itself a technology producer in many respects? Thanks.
You can start. You can start answering or commenting. Feel free.
Thank you, Çağdaş. This question actually aligns very well with what I had in mind to ask to my fellow panelists. So I'm going to combine your question with mine. The question was mainly considering U.S. decoupling intentions with China, if Turkey is going to end up on the Chinese side of things and be totally dependent on Chinese technology and regulations, for that matter, right? I want to put this question into the broader perspective of our region, like the European neighborhoods, Eastern Mediterranean. As Veysel aptly summarized our talk, China is going strong in the retail sector, right? Like working with SMEs, and Turkey's SMEs are growing dependent on China on solar cells, as Dursun put it, and whatnot, right? But this is actually not the pattern in our region, in the European neighborhood, especially Eastern Mediterranean. Like if you look at the Gulf region, for example, and the MENA region, and North Africa in particular, Egypt, for example, what we see is large Chinese investments, like the way that the Turkish state intended in the first phase of YEKAS, for example, like large solar and wind plants, solely funded by China, funded by Chinese credit agencies, banks, and built and operated by Chinese large state-owned enterprises. If we're going to talk about staying on the Chinese side of things and being isolated from, if that decoupling happens, which I doubt, but assuming that it happens, those who are going to stay on the Chinese side of things seems to me the MENA region, countries like Egypt, for example, or to a lesser extent Lebanon. I mean, the Gulf region is too independent, too powerful to stay on any side. But you know, not as a political orientation, but the very nature of Chinese involvement in Turkey's renewable energy seems to be not conducive to picking sides or being isolated, left in one side of decoupling because of the retail nature of things. Unlike Egypt, for example, again, who basically gave the entire renewable sector to Chinese SOEs and credit banks in comparison to Turkey. But I'm again very curious about your take on it as sector insiders, like how you're a joint venture, for example, right? Like a German joint venture. So like, what is your take on the nature of China's involvement in the region, in the MENA or Eastern Mediterranean region?
Just very briefly, I will just skip all of the parts regarding international relations. These are not something I know, unfortunately. But looking from a business perspective, I was just thinking about, again, my past experience and also the current things that we are doing. I'm looking at the mixture of the companies coming and meeting with us. So I've worked in Iraq, I've worked in Egypt, I've worked in United States, I'm working in Turkey, and I'm also working in some of the European Union countries as well. If I take out United States, let's say in Iraq and Egypt, all of my operations was tied to Chinese companies. There were not any EU country or US country over there. And I think there was no, let's say, international policy or international relations problems. Most probably that will be the same in the United States as well, because of the competition advantage of all of these things. First thing on my mind, we have to see the effects of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. That's one of the key points, most probably in the next 5 to 10 years, if the IRA would be successful or not. Because most of the capacity expansion projects right now going around, especially in Texas and some states in the United States as well, are supporting, let's say, small modular nuclear reactors. Especially we have quite good connections as Turkish diplomacy with one of the United States companies in hydrogen and also in battery production as well. So we have to see the effects of IRA, if it would be successful or not. But on the other hand, just again, coming to, let's say, my current perspective, you have seen the composition in the wind competitors in Dursun's presentation. Most of the companies in European Union and United States as well are struggling with their finances right now. These are giant companies. And it's quite shocking to me because we are all talking on a global perspective that renewable energy and the transitioning is the first goal of global, let's say, environment. But on the other hand, most of the wind turbine generators are on the brink of collapse. So I cannot see the same thing with the Chinese companies. That's a quite interesting thing. And also, if you look at the solar market, for example, there's a clear domination of Chinese equipment producers. If you look at the biomass market, it's the same with the Chinese as well. So I can say that right now, in this point of time, Chinese manufacturers, Chinese providers, suppliers are quite advantageous in the, let's say, international market. But again, even if there's international financing coming from China, and we see very bold, courageous approaches from Chinese suppliers as well from a financing perspective, I think it will take time from shifting from EU and US suppliers to Chinese companies. And in the meantime, as I've said, the puzzles of IRA and Repower EU or EU initiatives, we will have to see the results of this. So if IRA and other initiatives are quite successful in their both speed of doing things, most probably we will not see a direct dominance of Chinese players in this market. But if it doesn't go well with all of these scenarios, of course, just from a businessman point of view, I'd like to see the cheapest supplier with the highest production. That's it. Thank you.
Teşekkürler Levent Bey. Regarding the question, I can have two different perspectives. One of them is the approach of the European Union to Turkey in terms of its long-term policies. What will be the shape of the custom union? I mean, whether Turkey will easily be part of the free trade agreements, EU and third countries. This is one of the important dimensions. The trade relations with EU, third countries, and the position of the Turkey will be, let's say, important to see the trade flows or the finance flow from these third countries to Turkey. The other one is the position of the finance sector in Turkey. I mean, most of the money is coming from the US or the EU-driven financial organization in terms of share. I mean, the total amount of money is somehow provided mostly from US and EU finance organization or the Atlantic Group finance organization. I mean, if the Turkish banks starts to use more money from the Chinese companies or the Chinese credits, the situation could the situation is open to change, but let's make a kind of guess. The total amount of market will be shared between EU companies and Chinese companies. But for example, it is now less than 10%, for example, but in the next 20 years, I mean, the share of the Chinese companies in the total renewable markets, the tech markets, will increase. It's so obvious. But regarding Turkish historical position with the EU and the Western side, I think it will be kind of negotiation power for Turkey as well. Turkey will use it. I will be close to China and the Russian positions. At the same time, I will be close to EU. It will be bargaining power, Turkey, I think, at the same time.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the amazing panel. I do have 3 observations and remarks, and I have 1 question to you all. When we talk about renewable energy, and we have specifically focused on solar panels and EV batteries a lot, we cannot exclude the Uyghur factor in the Chinese market. China accounts for 75% of solar panel production, polysilicon production to be specific, in 2020. And Uyghur region accounts for 45% of world polysilicon production. And when we talk about 2022 figures, China now accounts for 89% of polysilicon production, which is a dominance in the global market. And we talked about the cost competitiveness of the Chinese solar industry. 15 years ago, there was almost no refinery of polysilicon in the Uyghur region. But we have to remember that Uyghur region accounts for 40% of coal reserve in China, which allows China to move heavy industries to the region at the benefit of released or low environmental regulations, strong state subsidies, and also forced labor practices across the region. And secondly, on the EV market, China is not a lithium-rich country like Congo, but it is one of the leading country that is processing lithium. And as of December 1st or 2nd, I don't remember the clear date, China is putting export ban on graphite because of its importance in EV production and also airspace technologies. And Uyghur region is very rich in processing plants and refineries for critical materials that are used in the EV market, and has significant exposure to the international market according to our assessments. And that is 2 of my observations. And third observation is there is a rising awareness of the forced labor practices in the Uyghur region, and there is Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act in the United States, which is suspending forced labor exposed products to enter the US market. Customs and Border Protection is doing quite a good job in recent month especially. And there is a push for EU Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive in the European Parliament, which is aimed at preventing forced labor exposure to enter the EU market in general, which has a strong pillar concerning the Uyghur forced labor practices. So given these 3 observations, there is a push for due diligence, a strong business commitment to due diligence in their whole supply chain, not only tier 1, tier 2, but throughout the whole supply chain. And we trace the solar and EV battery supply chain. There's a significant exposure to the Uyghur region, which is an international issue that is described as crimes against humanity at the level of United Nations. So given this context, how do we read the Turkish position in transitioning to the renewable market, given its strong ties with the European market in solar and EV industries? Thank you.
Can you briefly introduce yourself?
Oh, yes. This is Yalkun Uluyol. I am a PhD candidate in international relations, a full-time PhD student, try to finish my dissertation. But at the same time, I've been working on supply chain and business and human rights due diligence over the last 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have another question. However you like. If you like, yeah.
Burcu Meydan. It's okay. Faculty member of Marmara University. Thank you for all presentations. My question is about R&D technology transfer of renewable energy process, because you are, I'm not an expert of this topic, but as a just an observer. You mentioned Chinese companies or investment relation with Turkey as buying technology from China to transfer Turkish energy sector. But what about R&D cooperation between Chinese companies and Turkish companies in this sector specifically? Especially for as a comment to your report, Ceren Hocam. Thank you.
We still have like 15 minutes, and I think you can use like 3 minutes. Then maybe we can collect some other questions.
So I'm going ahead. About Yalçın's questions about global supply chains and due diligence act of the EU. That's an excellent question. It's like a very hot topic right now because the due diligence act has two pillars, right? Like one is the sustainable practices, which is more related to the technology use and the high cost of the technology use, which might lead to bankruptcies and rising unemployment and everything, the socio-economic impact of it. And the second pillar is, as you mentioned, the human rights aspect of it. Germany had its own due diligence act, and now EU is having not an act, but I think a statement on due diligence, which means that the act is on the way too, and that is. Of course, directly targeting China's global supply chains, right? Starting from Xinjiang, as you said, but also on the way to Europe too. So there are human rights violations or socio-economic impact of green transition in Southeast Asian countries too, also, and also on the way closer to our region, the MENA region, right? The Eastern Mediterranean also suffers from the same two pillars of global value chain sustainability. If Turkey has a position on that, I'm gonna again, I would like to check with the sector insiders, of course, but my observation is that Turkey itself is gonna suffer from the due diligence acts once it is issued in the EU, and there's not much preparation for that in Turkey too. So I've looked at previously the internal debates about the EU Due Diligence Act in Turkey, and they're so far concerned about Turkey's own problems, like the migrant workers, refugee work, the undocumented refugee workers, and everything, instead of the problems that are born out of being a part of the global value chain, which goes back to the Xinjiang issue, the Uyghur issue in China. So in my observation, it is not in the a part of the public debate in Turkey yet. And for the second question about R&D transfer, to my knowledge, the R&D transfer happens at the level of bilateral research projects that includes both research institutes, universities, and the private capital, the R&D departments of the private capital. And there has been an increase in Turkey-China bilateral research funding, especially in renewable energies. It is, again, like in my observation, that most of these R&D projects, bilateral, like government-to-government bilateral research funding is focusing on renewable energies. So the R&D transfer happens or will happen, it seems, through these formal mechanisms. But again, if there are more mechanisms within the sector, we will hear more from Levent.
Thank you very much. Well, unfortunately, my answer to your question would be very short because that's something very out of my scope, especially when it comes to human rights violations or any kind of due diligence acts. These are something out of my area of expertise. But just to look at the examples, all of the inclusion of Chinese companies in YECA tenders or other, let's say, kind of corporations, I don't think these were any unsuccessful bids or any unsuccessful coordinations in business was because of these violations or something like that. Of course, that would be a topic of Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Energy by itself. But I don't think it's something that's being crystallized at the business action point. On the other hand, I also agree with you. Most of the dominance in the solar sector and also the dominance in the battery sector most probably will come forward in the next coming years, and some kind of dominance in the EV charging and EV e-mobility sector as well. And I congratulate Chinese economy on this one. As you have said, most of the critical minerals are coming abroad to China, but the processing power and also let's say the manufacturing power of Chinese economy is quite great on these ones. So these are the major developments most probably we will be seeing in the next coming years as well. Just coming to your question about R&D, I think there are lots of movements to initiate a national approach to having technology in the renewable sector as well. I think TÜBİTAK and also Aselsan, Aspilsan, and most of the, let's say, I would say not governmented oriented, but NGO oriented companies are leading the way for these. And we are keeping in good contact with them as well. I also agree with you from that perspective. The R&D and the transfer of know-how is one of the first things that we have to do in these sectors. But in generic conditions, in the rush of keeping up with the economical growth, the energy sector was not that much inclined to focus on this perspective, especially when I look at the corporate level allocation of budgets. In most of the companies, I cannot see any kind of R&D budgets, or again, it's a governmental position, for example, for the distribution sector, to have distribution companies to have some R&D budgets. But I don't see a direct, very good execution in these budgets as well. This is something that we lack, unfortunately, in the, let's say, Turkish national electricity or energy sector.
Thank you, Levent Bey. Actually, to be honest, I don't have so much information about your question. And I have indirectly some comments regarding the corporate performance of the Turkish companies in Turkey and their formal and the legislative background. Nowadays, EU has been providing its draft and the final version of Corporate Sustainability Directive, Corporate Due Diligence Directive, but we don't have complementary legislation in Turkey. I mean, we don't have ministry-driven initiatives regarding the monitoring, reporting, and auditing the final performance of the companies. For example, we have environmental impact assessment procedure, but most of the commitments written in that reports are not finalized. It is also somehow better in the environmental and social impact assessments for the EU-based finance organization money. For example, if EBRD provides money for the X investment, Turkish companies have to prepare environmental and social impact assessment report. But the problem is that how is the quality of the monitoring of these commitments regarding pollution, regarding wildlife, etc., regarding conditions of the workers? It is somehow legislative gap, and it has many dimensions. I mean, it has to be it has to be taught about having this kind of stuff in the ministries. We don't have this kind of stuff to go and make this audit process. We have environmental management organization at provincial levels, but we don't have such capacity or such procedure to see the results of the commitments from the companies. This is a big problem in terms of environmental pollution and in terms of, let's say, obligatory migration from the rural areas due to these companies' negative impacts on the communities. Yeah.
We have a question from an online participant from Sezin Öney. I guess some of you are familiar with her, a fellow researcher. She actually has two questions. The first one is that I'm paraphrasing it. Do you think is Turkey's economic crisis causing it to trail even further behind in catching up with EU and China's frameworks regarding regulations, frameworks regarding green transition? So the impact of a Turkish economic crisis distress, at least we can say, on Turkey's transition to green or preparation for green transition. Second question is for you, Ceren. Sezin says in the first report, Ergenç and her collaborators emphasize that green energy cooperation competition nexus between Turkey and China leaned more towards competition. That's what she commented on your report. May we say, the question comes, may we say that now cooperation is gaining ground? Is there any change between the time between you publish your report and now? Yeah, I think these are the Sezin Öney's questions. I will ask you to try to limit yourself to 2 or 3 minutes at most.
Thank you, Sezin, for your questions. For the first question, Turkey's economic crisis affecting catching up with the EU and Chinese regulations, and also investment, I suppose, here. Well, yes, obviously, right? Turkish public sphere doesn't have the financial means to support the fields in terms of infrastructure and subsidies and whatnot. So there is that. But I think a second factor is the lack of initiative in the public sector. Well, in the Turkish state, the split between the ministerial bureaucracy and the presidential bureaucracy actually leads to a smooth development of comprehensive frameworks and regulations in these fields, similar to other industrial fields as well. So I think it's not only the economic crisis, but also a lack of macro planning in this sector as well. And for the second question, competition, collaboration nexus. So I guess this question is similar to Çağda's question, if Turkey is like leaning towards China in the renewable sector. Because if you look at the EU-China collaboration and competition, it is kind of compartmentalized, like more competition on the renewable markets. There's much concern about the offshore wind turbine markets in Northern Europe, for example, in Scandinavia. China is decisively taking over the markets over there, right? But when you look at SWAM and all the decarbonization efforts, there's more collaboration and synchronization. And Turkey being in between China and the EU in these two compartmentalized dimensions of the green sector in general having a tendency towards receiving more Chinese investment in renewable energies, but I don't think that it will be to an extent of Chinese domination of the Turkish sector. And for the decarbonization efforts, again, I'm going back to my answer to the first question. The lack of macro planning actually will prevent Turkey to take decisive steps in the near future. So we'll yet to see what's going to happen on that ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, the question is quite complicated to answer, unfortunately, but I will try to just give some answers from, let's say, just focusing on the electricity side of energy. Well, you can see in the other industries as well, but if you look at the electricity industry, it's architectured very beautifully. What I mean is, if you look at the generation facilities, for example, we had a feed-in tariff mechanisms, most of you know, renewable energy support mechanism, the so-called YEKDEM in Turkey. That was the main reason of having this installed, this much electrical power in Turkey. We had feed-in tariff. So just to give you an example, right now the wholesale electricity price is, let's say, $75 per megawatt hours, but the biomass facility that's in the feed-in tariff system right now is compensated with $133 per megawatt hours. And this difference between the wholesale market price and the feed-in tariff price was also compensated from the industry by itself. So there is no public funding coming to the electricity markets, or there's nothing coming from the pockets of the government. So the system just takes it from the customer and puts it in the pockets or the cash flow of the generation facilities. So in this kind of perspective, the generation segment didn't have a hit from the, let's say, deterioration of Turkish economy or financial crisis or something like that. But definitely agreed. On the other hand, we have another thing which I wanted to talk about. That's a very good question. The grid capacity. So if you wipe out all of the discussions that I have indicated, the major hurdle that we have in the electricity system of Turkey is the grid connection. Even if you want to build, let's say, 100 megawatts of wind power, you cannot do that because the grid capacity is quite limited. Just to give you a perspective about it as well, the total installed power in Turkey is about 105,000 megawatts right now. And in the last round of storage added generation facility applications that came to Energy Market Regulatory Authority, the total demand coming from the private investors in Turkey was around 250,000 megawatts. So we have 105,000 megawatts installed power, and on top of that, the private sector would like to install another 200,000 more. This is the main reason that the generation facilities didn't have a hit. But unfortunately, when it comes to TİAŞ, which is a state facility that runs the transmission system, the only capacity that the TSO can allocate for these power plants is around 28,000 megawatts. So there's a bottleneck on the investment side of TSOs, which is coming from the pocket of government. That's got a hit from, let's say, the financial crisis. So that's a bottleneck right now. That's the main portion of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Levent Bey. To be honest, I don't have extra comments on that issue, but what can I say is that the current, let's say, imbalance, the investment imbalance in the environmental sector. We have public money, we have access from the companies. For example, we have Çevre Temizlik Vergisi, which makes a huge amount. We have also packaging waste taxes, geri kazanım bedeli, and we have other stuff to have money for the public budget, but we don't know how it is spent in terms of environmental management. Okay, crisis, Turkish economic crisis is somehow very, let's say, very important in terms of distribution of that money. I mean, of course, most of the money coming from Çevre Temizlik Vergisi goes to municipalities, but we don't know other details, which makes the available money less effective in terms of using for the carbonization investment, etc. Regarding Turkish European Union approximation level is somehow very bad since the 2012, since the 2013. It's independent. It is directly related with crisis, but at the same time, it is independent from the crisis. What we know is that the Turkish approximation, the Turkish relation with the EU is not at the same level at the beginning of the 2080s. For example, the amount of money provided from the EU to Turkey is 10 times less in terms of environmental management, in terms of wastewater treatment plants, etc., etc. This is also related with the Turkey and EU relations. I mean, providing the financial support and the implementation in the field are also important. The money is coming from Turkey. It's from coming EU to Turkey is not so high when you compare with the last 10 years.
Yes, we don't have any question or comment anymore. Ergenç. Thank you so much for you too. We can close the panel and move to